I am going to welcome everyone who's here this evening and say that it's 7 o'clock, and I think we'll start. I'd like to welcome the old faces I see, many of them, and some new faces that are unfamiliar to me. We've been meeting at the East Litchfield Chapel here over the past 10 or 15 years on many occasions for different purposes. Tonight, the purpose is to take a look at what we know as Topsmead before it was Topsmead, when it was farms of families that had lived in the area for 200 years and raised hundreds of children. We're going to review the history of Topsmead before it was Topsmead. And as I give an introduction, I think of Topsmead at the top of the hill. The wonderful gift that Edith Chase left to us and all the people of Connecticut. I think of all the times that people in this room I know have walked and enjoyed the land that is Topsmead today. I think about the 500 acres that over 500 acres that she accumulated in the years between 1917 and 1966 through 22 different purchases that she made during that period of time. I'm not going to put you to sleep tonight talking about those 22 purchases, which are really of very little interest. What I'd like you to do tonight is meet the people, the families, the farms, and the stories that play a part in the development of Topsmead. All the farms and families that gave a little piece over the course of centuries that became part of Topsmead. Any family that we talk about tonight, any farm that we talk about tonight is represented somewhere, some part of what today we know as Topsmead. And to tell that story, I need to take us back to the past. I need to take us back to the Revolutionary War period. I need to take us back to the years between 17. Let me decide here. I had this down earlier today. Take us back to the years between the start of the Revolutionary War in 1775 and the Battle of Bunker Hill and 1831, when the last slave that grew up in East Litchfield on Buell Road left this world and left her estate and her property to the town of Litchfield. So we're going to be covering that period, 1775. We'll touch bases on it twice. And we'll end in 1831 with the death of Sylvia Stocker and the last smallpox epidemic that hit Litchfield, all part of this story of Topsmead. So if I stop there before we go into any of the families and get attention to the map that's showing, Topsmead map showing on the screen, if we look to the left, we can see that the westernmost boundary of Topsmead, down at the bottom, is what we know as Route 254. But throughout history, it's more commonly known as the county road, the Litchfield County Road. If we look in the middle of Topsmead at the road that runs vertically, it's listed as Jefferson Hill. I can't tell you where that name came from. I've never seen any source for it, but I know throughout history it was more commonly known as the Second Chestnut Hill, with the first Chestnut Hill being Fern Road and the Chestnut Hill on the other side of 118. If we look further, a little bit north to the horizontal road, which we know as the East Litchfield Road, but that's a very late name applied to that road. Throughout history, it was known as the road between Litchfield and Hartford. It was known as the toll road during the period of time we're talking about, with the toll station being located just north of Mesa Road, where everyone had to stop Monday through Saturday to get a pass to get through the toll gate. the rates that varied, whether you were a sole rider on a horse, whether you were bringing a wagon with goods on it, whether you were bringing cattle or sheep through. The rates varied, but there was no charge on Sunday, so that people going to church were left with their coins to leave in the basket or the plate that was passed during church services. If we look on the east side now, where Buell Road is, that's a very late name applied to the road, although the Buell family lived there for 230 years. Historically, it was known as the Third Chestnut Hill, or Watch Hill, or Spruce Avenue. The name Buell Road didn't really get on it until really the middle of the 20th century. And I think it's on Buell Road that we'll start today. We will never get through all the people and the families and the stories that contributed to Topsmead, but we're going to start tonight. When I first started blocking this out in my head for this talk, I figured we could get all the way around. But I have to confine this to no more than an hour, and Jim is going to time me over there and say that what we don't cover, we'll schedule another night some night in the future. So we're going to focus starting on Buell Road today, and we'll go to slide number 2, I hope. We're not going to be going in the same order because we had to decide to leave some out tonight and come back to them another day. So we're going to start on Buell Road, and we're going to start down here at number 1, following the chart that's on the wall. And these are, I'm going to give a new name to the road tonight for tonight's purposes. I'm not going to call it Buell Road or Spruce Avenue or the Third Chestnut Hill. I'm going to call it the Veterans Road, because all the families we're going to talk about in the next few minutes were veterans of the Revolutionary War, returning home to live where they had lived with their wives before the war. If I start down at number 1, Ellen and I happen to live in house number 1 at the moment, down at the end of Buell Road. But at the time, the years we're talking about, 1775 to 1831, this was a home of Daniel Lord and his wife and their 8 children. Very careful tonight. If you look at the chart, you'll see that a wife is always listed. Usually when we're doing history of people at this time, the women don't exist. You would think that the men had those kids all by themselves, because there are no women. They list the man and his children. But all of our families had wives and mothers that were left to take care of those children during all the wars that their husbands were off fighting. But we start with Daniel and Phoebe, who raised 8 children in the house that Ellen and I now live in, all born at home, all lived to adulthood. Phoebe outlived her husband by about 40 years, dying sometime between her 99th and 100th birthday. It depends on who's writing about her, which age she's listed. But she and Daniel are buried in the East Litchfield Cemetery, and their stone can still be found. If we move up the road to number 2, which in today's world is the Caddy home. But before it was a Caddy home, it was the home of Charles and Anna Catlin. Charles died during the war, left Anna a widow with 6 children that she raised by herself, and accumulated enough wealth on her own to leave all 6 of her children with enough land to start farms of their own. Stories for another day. The items 4 and 5 are the 2 Peter Buell homes, one of which still exists in Milton, who was taken down piece by piece and moved there in the early 1960s. And the second one is the Peter Buell Jr. house that I call the Gypsy House, because at various times in history, it's been moved from Buell Road up onto the Topsmead farm. And then later, when the property was sold, when the state took over and they didn't want to support all the houses that were up there, that house was bought by Dr. Heinrich, moved back down onto Buell Road. So it's been relocated 3 times in its history. If we move up to Chase Road, that I have in red, because that house no longer stands. All the other houses that I'm talking about, there's a house on that site at this moment. That was the home of Michael Dickinson and his wife Abigail. Michael was a veteran of the French and Indian War, and by the time the Revolution came, he was an elderly man still experiencing the consequences of injuries he received during the war. But they were a family with 7 children at that time. We're counting all the kids that lived on Buell Road, with 8 in number 1, 6 in number 2, 5 in number 3, which I've skipped. We're going to come back to it. Which was the home of Daniel Lord. We're going to be talking more about him in a few minutes. 5 children there, 5 children in number 5, none in number 4. They'd all grown up. 8 children in that red one, number 6, and up at the corner in number 7, another 5 children. At that time, in those years between 1775 and 1790, there were over 30 children living on Buell Road alone. They could be some pretty noisy evenings at this time of year when the kids are all done with their chores and had a chance to play. But we get up to number 7, which initially was the home of Abijah Peck. And we're going to visit him for quite a while in a few minutes. But in the period we're talking about initially, it's the home of Elton Jones and his junior and his family, who was another captain in the Revolutionary War. If we run quickly around the corner, going to slide 2, we hope we're going to be in the same order because we've done some rearranging because of time. We're still walking. We go around the corner and we'll pass number 8, the home of Archelaus Buell, a brother of the Peter Buells that we'll visit hopefully either tonight or another day. And number 9, which was what today is Lost Fox Inn. But in 1780, it was the Bull Farm, the Captain William Bull Inn and residence, that was a stop after climbing that miserable East Litchfield Road. There was no 118, that everybody who came from Hartford had to climb that hill from the Naugatuck River up to the top of the hill. And all the horses and people were thirsty by the time they got to the what was known as the William Bull Tavern, a common stop. If we just go down a little bit more and look at 10 and 11, those are the homes of the McNeil brothers. 2 of the 3 brothers that survived the sinking of their ship off Nova Scotia in 1737, which cost the lives of 100 of the 200 people that were on board the ship. They lost their mother, their father, and one of the brothers lost a wife and a child. But the 3 brothers survived, came to Litchfield, and they're going to be a story for another night, one we won't get to today. If we turn around and come back and just walk the other way, walk over toward Fern Road, we're going to encounter another group of Revolutionary War veterans. Number 13 is the 3rd brother, the youngest of the McNeil brothers, Alexander McNeil. I'm losing where I am now. Number 12, James Baldwin was a man who married one of the Dickinson's daughters. Another veteran of the Revolutionary War. 14 is a free black who served in the army of the Revolution. And we don't hear much about the blacks who served in the war, but James Columbus was one of them, who in the 1780s had a home, a carpentry shop on Fern Road. We won't go any further up the road. There are more families, but we've just covered quickly a group of 12 people who served in the Revolutionary War, who lived in this tight little neighborhood. Families of over 70 people, including 60 children during that time. From there, we're now going to become, you've had that picture, we're going to become more specific, and I'm going to take you back to Buell Road. And hopefully on the slides we're going to get there. Maybe. We're going to take you back to Buell Road. And we're looking at the Daniel Lord home. But before we talk about that, I want you all to close your eyes and imagine you're standing at the entrance to Topsmead. And you've got your back to the hill going up to Topsmead, and you're looking across Buell Road. You're looking across Buell Road, and if you look hard, on the other side of the road, you'll see evidence of a cellar hole. You'll see part of a foundation that still can be seen there, and it's familiar to all of us who walk the road. That is what's left of the Michael Dickinson and Abigail Dickinson home that stood there from the 1740s probably up through 1852. In 1884, we're still in that period. We're going to stay in that period. In 1884, Michael Dickinson, that French and Indian War veteran, father of 7 children. 1780. Did I say 18? Thank you. 1784. Thank you. Correct me at any time I'm wrong. 1784, Michael becomes ill. His wife is pregnant for the 8th time, and he soon dies, leaving her a widow with 7 live children and 1 on the way. She soon delivers and now is a widow in 1784 with a large family to raise, all under the age of 21, all under the age of 18 at that time. Certainly she got help from the neighbors, including one of the neighbors who helped was the Daniel Lord family. And we're going to return to Daniel Lord now and move ahead 2 years. We're going to move to 1786. And in 1786, Daniel Lord's wife and mother of 5 of his children is pregnant for the 6th time. She's in her early 40s. Her teenage daughter, one of her children, a teenage daughter by the name of Huldah, is ill, and they're not sure the daughter is going to survive much longer. On the day that Hannah Lord delivers her 6th child, her teenage daughter dies. 2 days later, Hannah herself dies of complications from that pregnancy. And Daniel now is a widower with 5 children, the young just born. Around the corner, we have Abigail Dickinson, a mother on her own with raising that large family. And I can tell by the smiles on people's faces, you know what happens next. But Daniel and Abigail solved the problem of raising their children by getting together and getting married. They soon have a child of their own, another tragedy, the child who dies after living only a brief 4 months. But during the next 8 years, Daniel and Abigail together get their children through adolescence and out on their own. And during that period of time, Daniel, as each of the children, Dickinson children, reaches majority, buys out their share of the Dickinson farm, giving them money to start their own lives, which they all do, moving to all parts of the country at that time, many of them out to the Ohio Territory that was part of Connecticut's heritage. So that in 1797, Daniel owns both farms. 1797 is a special year in the history of the Dickinson home. 1797, if we pause for a moment in our nation's history, 1797, George Washington has now finished his 21 years of service to the new nation. The Constitution has been passed, the Bill of Rights has been passed, and John Adams is president. The 1797 takes us back to one of George Washington's major problems during the Revolutionary War, and that's the health of his army. One of the scourges of the army was smallpox. He continually lost a substantial portion of his army to illness, and one of those illnesses was smallpox. At times during his generalship, he passed laws saying that everybody in the army needed to be vaccinated. But there was opposition to vaccinations back in 1775 as well as today. And that order was never enforced by people he relied on to enforce it who did not agree with vaccinations of any kind. So the army very often brought back smallpox when the soldiers returned home. And in 1797, one of the frequent smallpox invasions of our society occurred. And the leaders in Litchfield had the same kind of arguments we have today about vaccination. There were those that urged that everybody vaccinated, and there were those that said no one should be vaccinated. The compromise that was reached in 1797 was that pest houses would be created in the community, and 3 were set up. Those pest houses were where people who were willing to take that crazy risk and get vaccinated had to be confined until it was proven that they were not going to contaminate or infect anyone else. One of those pest houses was the Dickinson House, across from the entrance to Topsmead. There were tough rules regarding those pest houses and the rules that had to be applied to them. One of them was that anybody who decided they were going to take that crazy risk and get vaccinated had to be bonded. The doctors who were going to treat those people who were vaccinated had to be bonded. The nurses, and they weren't nurses at that time, they called them tenders. They tended to the ill. They had to be vaccinated. And there had to be signs posted on each side of whatever was a pest house up to 40 yards away, which is 660 feet, so that people would be warned that they should not go past that sign without taking a risk that they might pick up smallpox just as it passed through the air. And the people who were confined to the pest houses could not go beyond those signs if they went out for air. One of the people who was an overseer, because overseers had to be in charge of those pest houses, and they had to be bonded also, was William Bull, who was the owner of what came to be known later as the Captain William Bull Tavern, which is now Lost Fox on Route 202. He was one of the overseers who had a say on when the doctors and the tenders indicated that someone was safe to release back into public, that he could sign off on their release back into the community. How long the Dickinson House opposite the entrance to Topsmead was used is unknown from any records that I have been able to find. But we know that the house, that smallpox reoccurred again in 1831. And again, there was a fight in the town of Litchfield over how to treat that smallpox. And the selectmen at first passed a ruling saying that everybody in town should be vaccinated. But there was violent opposition to that decision, including some members of the Board of Selectmen, like Captain Marsh, who said over his dead body, would he ever be vaccinated? And he was a veteran of the Revolutionary War. When they had a town meeting and a vote on the issue of vaccination in 1831, 2/3 of the people attended the meeting supported it, but 1/3 were opposed to it. And as a result of that split, the decision to vaccinate everybody in town never really happened. We know from the record that the smallpox house, the Dickinson House, was still standing in 1848 from land records. But the land records in 1852, the map that shows all the houses in Litchfield show that it's no longer standing. Now the site is defined on that map as waste, which means the house no longer stands, but there's a cellar hole there. When I interviewed Alice Grace Buell Edwards, who I consider the last of the Buells on Buell Road, in the 1970s, and asked her about what her family tradition was on that house, she said her father told her, and her father was alive in the 1850s, told her that the family story was that the house was burned before 1852. She didn't know whether it was an accident or on purpose, but the family, her family, identified as the house as being destroyed by fire between 1848 and 1852. Saying goodbye to the pest house, opposite the entrance to Topsmead, and moving up to the house on the corner. What we remember, oh no, I didn't finish that, did I? Okay. I got to stay with the Dickinsons here. I haven't finished, but that's the Daniel Lord house where the Dickinson family and the Lord families moved together during that time of the pest house period that I talked about. And we're going to go up the road now, and hopefully we're going to find the slide on the house on the corner. Nope, we're going to go ahead again. We haven't, well, we'll do that one. Okay, we'll skip that. We're going to skip across the road and come back to the Heinrich house, the slave house, in a few minutes. That is the house that we know as Lost Fox Inn at the moment and Tollgate Inn. This is what it looks like today. This is what it looked like when the Fuchsenitz family took it down in 1928 to save it from being destroyed, because the Vanderwater family, who was running a dairy at that time there, decided they needed a new house, and they built a new one, which still stands just above that site. If you know the walk down the East Litchfield Road, you can know where that house stood by the lilac bushes that still remain on that site. That all those houses had a lilac bush, and many of our houses still do. In the beginning, the house was not William Bull's house, but it was built by Isaac Bull and his wife Eunice, who had raised 6 children in Harwington and moved the whole family down to the East Litchfield Road and built that house in the late 1750s. Isaac was not only a farmer, but he was a teacher. And at various times in the house's history, back in the 1760s, 70s, and 80s, there would be as many as 20 children going to the site for school. Mr. Smith, who kept a diary of growing up in Litchfield, talks about in his diary being there in 1775, the Bunker Hill year, because Litchfield could not find a teacher for the school in the center of town, which used to stand pretty much where Meadow Street now is. So his family sent him there, and he, in his diary, talks about Isaac Bull as a kind old man, elderly man, who liked children and taught them reading, writing, and arithmetic for part of the day, had them working on the farm another part of the day, and left them free in the evening to do some roaming and romping. And he remembers on a June evening like right now, looking for strawberries in the field. Just as I look for strawberries today from the delicious pie my wife made of strawberry rhubarb pie yesterday that I had for lunch before I came. Isaac 8 children. 5 of them were boys. 4 of them died before they reached the age of 42, leaving widows with children. Some genetic issue with the family meant that his sons could not survive into middle age. And in Isaac's old age, he was raising not only his younger children, but he was responsible, he and Eunice were responsible for the children, his grandchildren, and the widows that were left behind. Most of them living in that house, the older house that you see up there. When he died, all of those grandchildren are remembered in his will. And he puts his daughter, and the name I keep forgetting, Ursula, he makes his daughter Ursula responsible for keeping the family together. Ursula is another unique figure in our town's history because she was divorced at that age. We don't read about or hear about divorced women being independent or the reason for their divorce, but her father obviously had not rejected her because of that divorce, because he put her in charge of all the family fortunes and taking care of her mother and her sister-in-laws. Ursula runs the family for a few years, and then all of a sudden, William Bull appears in town. He's a second cousin who was a captain in the Revolutionary War, fought in the Battle of Fort Ticonderoga, and in his older age moved to Litchfield, bought a house on North Street, and soon leases the Isaac Bull farm, taking over responsibility from running it from Ursula and all the sister-in-laws. In 1790, not long after he comes to town, his wife dies. And now he buys out the Bull farm. And you can guess, looking around, you can guess that pretty soon the divorced Ursula and the widowed William are married and set about updating and improving the building and the farm. And our friend Mr. Smith in his later diaries talks about stopping at the farm, the inn, on his way back from Hartford to spend some time and have some refreshment with Ursula and William, and notes that William does not look well. Soon after that diary entry, William also dies, and Ursula, again, and all the women are left without a male leader. Ursula hangs on running the farm with help for a few years, but soon sells the estate and the farm and the inn, and it passes through the hands of a Buell family member, a Griswold family, and into the hands of the Candy family, which was spelled Candee, not Candy. I only mention that in passing quickly tonight because David Candy was a soldier in the Civil War. He left Litchfield to join the service, leaving a wife and a young child behind. And in 1863, he disappears in a battle. He's listed in Litchfield as a deserter. And as a result of that classification, his wife and child lose the support that all members fighting in the service will receive from the town each month. But he hadn't deserted. At the end of the war, thanks to records kept illicitly by a person from Plymouth, it was discovered that he had died a prisoner of war at Andersonville, the notorious prison in Georgia. And when that was finally discovered, the town, without any great philosophical debate, gave all the unpaid stipends to the family to help them get through. After the Candy family, that farm passes to the Vanderwater family, and we have one of their milk bottles up on top here because they were one of the prosperous dairies of East Litchfield at that time. And it was the Vanderwaters who decided in 1928 that the old house had to go. They needed a new home. It was beyond repair. And it was the Fusionist family that saved it and moved it to 202, where it still exists today. So I'm going to go back now, to try to get to the corner of East Litchfield Road, and the house that we know as Dr. Heinrich's house. See if we can find it. We had to make some adjustments for time tonight. So there it is. Okay. This is the house we all know from the neighborhood as Dr. Heinrich's house, but was originally built by Abijah Peck. Abijah Peck and his wife Keturah built the house and moved into it about 1760 and lived there developing the farm for 20 years before Keturah died without giving Abijah any children. And we know that if they didn't have children, it was her fault, not his, because it was never the husband's problem if there were no children. So he soon began looking for a new wife. And in his hunt and his visits to the Congregational Church on Sundays, he met Rhoda Collins. Rhoda Collins was the youngest daughter of the first minister of Litchfield, Tim Collins. And when he met her, she was already a widow with 5 children. She had buried 3 husbands in her young life. And that didn't deter him worrying about being her fourth husband, but what he noticed was that she could produce kids, and that's what he wanted. He wanted a family. So it wasn't long before they became husband and wife, and she did succeed in giving him 2 children, a son and a daughter. But in the late 1780s, he becomes ill, and he makes a will. And in his will, he mentions his slave, Jack. And Jack the slave would become the property of Rhoda until he reached the age of 26. And at the age of 26, he was to be freed. Until that time, he would be a slave of Rhoda, unless she remarried, unless she found a 5th husband. Then the slave would go to his son to care until the slave reached the age of 26. But Rhoda did not remarry. I guess she decided that 4 husbands and 7 kids were enough. And she devoted the next few years to raising those children, including the children from her earlier husbands that Abijah had accepted into his home as part of his marriage to Rhoda. By 1790, the year of our first census of our country, Rhoda Peck has 2 black people living in her home, obviously helping her raise the family. One of them is Jack, who is now free because he's not listed as a slave. He's listed as 2 free blacks living in her home, helping her with the estate and the property. The other one I can infer from research was a woman by the name of Violet, who later became Jack's wife. Violet was a slave of someone on North Street, which is another story, but they were both free in 1790. And in 1800, Rhoda has sold the property to the Eaton Jones family, who owned it from then up until 1930, when they sold part of it to Miss Chase. I lost my train there, back to it. So in 1800, the freed slave Jack and Violet are now living in a home of their own on the East Litchfield or Tollgate Road. They have a house there, and in 1808, Jack, the freed slave, borrows money takes a loan from the state of Connecticut, who at that time gave out mortgages as a way. One of the ways they raised money was through mortgages, because they didn't have a state sales tax at that time. And they earned an income from the mortgages they lent out. Jack had a mortgage for $100 from the state of Connecticut on his house and his barn and his 2 acres. He and Violet had 2 children. I almost just said he had 2 children and left Violet out. Whew. He and Violet had 2 children, and on that 2 acres, and he earned part of his method for supporting his family was doing day labor for farms in the area. One of the farms that Litchfield Historical Society has records on is the Wheeler Farm on Clark Road, where he often was employed as a day laborer, doing things like repairing a stone wall, helping with harvest, chopping firewood, and he would not be paid in cash, but he would be paid in items like a sack of flour. But in 1831, that year that we reached for the end of smallpox in Litchfield, Jack dies, leaving Violet a widow, in which she receives 1/3 of the house, which is pretty common practice at that time. She has a room on the east side of the house. She has right to access the fireplace. She has right to walk a certain path to the barn and to the well so she can get water. And she has right to access to part of the basement underneath the house. And it's that basement that helped me finally find the site of the house after Thanksgiving this year. So that house, after Violet decides to sell it, divide what money is left among her 2 children, and pay off the debts that are owed, is acquired by the Eaton Jones family And on the 1852 map of Litchfield, you can see that Jones owns what we know, this house, the Heinrich house that we remember. It owns the Jack Jacklin or Jack Peck house. But the house disappears from the record after 1870. So sometime between 1870 and 1900, the house disappears. And Jack, the freed slave, also disappears from the Litchfield story, which means that I need to, how am I doing for time? 5 minutes?
No, you've got 5 minutes till it's 45.
Oh, okay. After touching bases on the Jack Jacklin slave story, because of our time constraints tonight, and my recognition that this is history of Topsmead is going to take more than one night, I'm going to jump. I'm going to jump to the story of another East Litchfield slave, because we cannot end this session without meeting Sylvia Stocker. So we're out at that junction now where Collins Road is, where Fern Road is, that complex there. That at that time, in that period we're talking about, one of the houses that stood there, that still stands there, was the home of Isaac Baldwin. Now, Isaac Baldwin was a towering figure in Litchfield history. He was a town clerk for 31 years. He was a leading responsible person for the county court. He was served as a selectman, a giant of a figure. And Sylvia was his slave during the lifetime period that we know. He lived to be in his mid-90s somewhere. Can't be sure, but his birth date is listed as 1710, and he died in 1805. His birthday is questioned, but we're talking about a man who lived into his 90s, and we're talking about a slave that he had by the name of Sylvia, who took care of him and his needs, both in his earlier years and in his ancient years. We know from later history that Sylvia was born in that magical year of 1775 that I said we'd meet twice in this talk. We know that from the documents of her freedom, where she's listed as being 31 in 1806. But during the time she was a slave to that towering figure in Litchfield history, one of our few town clerks that they last forever. He was one of them. She was an exceptional slave. Although he never freed her, she was treated differently from many slaves during that period. She learned to read and write from him. She couldn't have learned it any other place, and probably helped keep home records for him in his advanced years. Besides taking care of the house and cooking his meals, he allowed her to marry a free black during the time that he was a slave. A very unusual slave story, but he never freed her. He allowed her and her free black husband to build a small home on the east side of his property so they could retire to at night and be a family, and then return to him each day to take care of his exterior needs and interior needs. When he died in 1805, she was still a slave. But a special slave, but still a slave. And it was his children, Isaac Baldwin Jr., and one of Isaac's brothers, who at one point was the minister of the Episcopalian Church in Litchfield, who eventually moved to free Sylvia from slavery. To be freed from slavery at that period in history was not easy. The selectmen did not make it easy because they didn't want to be stuck with the responsibility of paying for old slaves and sick slaves who owners freed just so they could get rid of being responsible for them. So in order for a slave to be freed, the selectmen had a voice. And if you wanted to free a slave that there were questions about, you had to apply to the selectmen to free that slave. So Isaac Baldwin Jr. asked the selectmen for permission to free Sylvia Stocker after being a slave for 31 years. She had to appear before the selectmen. She had to tell the selectmen that, yes, I want to be free. She had to demonstrate to the selectmen that she could provide for herself and would not become a burden on the selectmen. And once she had passed those tests, then they would rule that she could be free. So she did pass those tests, and she was freed. And from 1806 until her death in 1831, we're back to that year again, I said was the end of our talk. She was free. She was a leader in the black community that developed at the foot of the hill where Holly House is now. There was a large black community in the beginning of the 19th century. She sold a home that her husband, Orange Stocker, had built to just next to the house, and that house was moved down to the Holly House section by the black person who bought it. She couldn't sell the land because she didn't own it, but the house was theirs. She bought another house on the entrance to the religious buildings up by Cross Locker, where she lived the final years of her life. As a leader in the black community, the one person who could read and write, taking care of many of their needs. And she is the rare person, black female, that we can find a will for in our history. 1831, this ex-black female slave had accumulated enough property to write a will. And in that will, we learn something about what her values and attitudes were. The will has three parts that are significant to us. One, she left half of the money that was left after her estate was settled to the missionaries who were in Africa spreading the word of Christianity. She left the other part of the money that was left in her estate to blacks who wished to return to Africa, who were either freed slaves or the children of freed slaves who would like to go back to the country of their origin. The third part of her estate was her library. We're talking about an ex-slave who had a library when she died that she left to the selectmen, charging them with the responsibility of sharing that library, which we can be sure had a Bible in it, based on what we've learned about her at this point, charging the selectmen with the responsibility of sharing that library with the poor in town, black or white, who could not afford to buy books. I have no idea how many books were in the library or what happened to them after that, but in 1831, that's what her will outlined. An exceptional person in Litchfield history, which certainly is not remembered in any of the books or stories we read about Litchfield. So we've met a few of them tonight. And how am I doing for time?
Give another 10 minutes.
Okay. I turn and look up. I turn up and say, let's take a look now at the Buells. And we've got to find a slide somewhere in there on the Buell family. We're going to skip the McNeil brothers. I've introduced them, but that's got to be another story, another day. We've covered Sylvia Stocker. We haven't touched Cash Africa. I introduced you to James Columbus. And we're now going to take a quick look, not a detailed look, at the Buell family. Now, maybe we can find the original Buell house up there. Maybe we can, maybe we can't. Okay, that's a reconstruction of what is known as the Peter Buell house. Tradition published in a variety of sources tell us that that house was built in 1723 by Peter's father, John Buell, which is not true. The house was not built in 1723 by John Buell. John Buell never moved from his home that was on West Street in the center of Litchfield, on the site pretty much where the town hall is today. The Peter Buell house was not built in 1723, as many stories tell, and published very often, was probably built in 1734 to 1740. After Peter Buell Sr. Married in 1734, got his first earmarks for his cattle in 1736, and which kind of fixed the date. And he didn't get any land on East Litchfield Road technically until 1740, when John Buell, the father, gave him 100 acres. We can guess the house may have been built before then, because in 1740 he also gave grants of land to his other sons, began dividing up his estate as his sons were all getting married and raising children. That Peter Buell house, unfortunately, we have no picture of what it looked like before it was taken down in 1958 and moved to Milton. I'm hoping that some family like the Caddy family sometime, somewhere in the records, have a picture of that house because we would like to add it to our collection. But that's the reconstruction of what it looked like when it was reassembled in Milton after it was taken down by Litwin and moved in 1961. Would I love to have a picture for our collection here? Yes. And if anybody in this group can add that picture to our collection, I would welcome it. Peter Buell raised a family of 6 in that house on Buell Road. Peter Buell Sr. lost 3 of his children, his younger children, 2 of them in 1853 within weeks of each other when they were not yet teenagers, and one, the last one, in 1770. So that in 1770, Peter Sr. and his wife, now all their children are raised. Peter Jr. and Peter Sr. exchanged houses. Peter Jr. had built a house up from this house, and he had a growing family. So they made a deal, and they exchanged houses, and Peter Sr. moved to the little house, and Peter Jr. moved to the big house. And when Peter Jr. then dies, that house, the little one, gets passed to one of his sons by the name of Charles. And Charles is the Buell who owns all the land in the center of Topsmead and the 2 houses that were on the top of the hill. Charles was left an orphan, not an orphan, but he loses his father in 1851. And 1851 is another year of tragedy for the Buell family. 1851, Charles Sr., who was another towering figure in Litchfield history, having taken care of all the land records and taxes for over 30 years. He dies in his 70s. 2 of his sons die within 2 months of each other. So between March, April, and May, Charles, his son Frederick, and his son George all die. Charles was the son of George. They all died within 3 months. Not only did they die, but 2 of their close relatives, the brother of Charles, who was a doctor, and the son of Samuel, which was another doctor brother of Charles, all also died within that period. So it appears that one of those chronic diseases was passing around the family during that time. And the Litchfield records only list one cause for one of them, and it talks about lung fever, which suggests that it was pneumonia that was passing throughout the family. But it devastated the family and left Charles, the father of the last generation of Buells, as a 6-year-old. He grew up, raised a family, and I think we can probably sneak in a couple pictures of the family at this point where our time is good. Time is good, okay. This is a house that some people in the audience are familiar with. It's one of the Buell houses. It's one of the Buell houses that I'm not going to talk about now because we can get to that later. We're going to move to move the houses up on the hill, maybe. The 2 earlier houses. This is that earlier Peter Buell Jr. house that was moved up there at one point, and then after the state bought the property and sold it, it was moved back down to Buell Road, pretty much to where it stood in earlier days. The other house was built by George Buell, who died in that 1851 period when the family collapsed. It still stands up at Topsmead, which allows us to move to another picture. I'm doing better than I thought we would do. Now this is a picture of Charles Buell, who survived that 1851 collapse of the family. He was the one who was 5 years old at the time, 6 years old at the time. And his son George. You can't tell from that picture, but those were very tall men. Could probably play basketball today. They were both over 6'3". And we'll move from that picture to this picture, which is George, the one we saw a minute ago, his son, Philip Buell, who was the last owner of the Buell farm on the other side of Buell Road. I don't know who the other person is, unfortunately. We move to the next picture, and he's another giant of over 6'4". We move to the last Buell that I want to make sure we don't miss tonight. And that's a young picture of Alice Grace Buell Edwards that I and a few other people in the audience here have to know is the last Buell from Buell Road. Alice was the son of that daughter of that Charles and the brother of the George we just looked at. And I was fortunate enough to interview her in the 1970s when she was in her 70s and capture many of her memories about growing up on Buell Road. She talked about how she hated milking cows and would have done anything not to become another one of those Buell women who would get married, raise kids, and do all the housework. She wanted an education, and she had to fight with her father, the older person in that previous picture, to stay in school because he wanted her to stop school after grammar school. But she won the battle. She went to high school, graduated from high school in June of a year, and in September of the same year, she started teaching school at the Campbell one-room schoolhouse without any college. We're back in the early part of the 20th century now, and she would ride to school every day on her horse, and the horse would be parked outside of the school during the day while she taught. Later, she did get some college education in New Britain, but when she started teaching, it was fresh out of high school, unheard of. But she fought her father to be able to do that, and I was very fortunate to be able to interview her in her older age. With that, and skipping major parts of the story of the people and the lands that played a part in the growth of Topsmead, I'm going to stop for a moment and look at my notes and say a couple of important things. We've missed any talk about Echo Farms, which is a major piece of East Litchfield history. Another collection of over 400 acres under control of one person that was part of the revolution, moving into glass bottled milk being delivered to people at home. And milk bottles, glass bottles from Echo Farm. The only evidence of it now is Lee's stables up there. That milk was delivered to New York City from the railroad station down at the foot of this hill on a daily basis for a generation. We haven't touched Echo Farms. We haven't done the McNeil brothers. We haven't touched many of the slave and free black pieces of the history. And we haven't done a great deal of detailed work on the Buells, which we could do another day if people are interested. At this moment, I want to do a pause, and I want to thank Jonathan for helping me get this far in these presentations. I want to thank Jim for keeping my eye on the time and not talking forever. I want to thank the guests for being patient tonight. And I want to pause and take a minute while we have all these people together to do one little piece story of Topsmead after it was Topsmead. And I had trapped Mark Caddy this morning as I drove by the Caddy house saying, how about you talk about planting trees at Topsmead when you were young? Go.
Surely, I try to keep it short and
sweet, but we grew up at the Kaplan Farm proper, which is, we go back to the first picture when we started tonight, at the corner of Marsh and Buell. And in that Marsh Road area by the Buell Farm to the west of the Buell Farm proper was an empty meadow. And it later became Bernie Stairs' pond, I think a third pond on the site of Topsmead proper. And it was about 1970.
He's almost there. He's almost there, Mark.
So, this is our piece of property here that we just never bought, the old Kaplan Farm that we grew up on. And to the north of that, where Bernie Stairs Pond is, was an open field. And I have a childhood memory. I don't think my sister was around yet. Probably 1970. I don't think you were around yet. And there's pictures somewhere in our house of Bernie Stairs and Kenny Moore, a couple of the hands at Topsmead. And we were out there, and I remember somebody plunking me on an apparatus behind a tractor, and it had a clicker on it, and I was allowed to pick little saplings out of this box. And Edith was in her Packard that day watching us. There's a metal gate across where the Buell Farm stands now, and she was just sitting there watching us. And I got to plant some of those trees back in 1970 in that little path that winds down to the pond mill. So that's one of my memories of her as a child. I couldn't have been more than 7. Yeah. So thank you for letting me share that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Tell them about the ice cream.
Oh, and she took us for ice cream one day too in her car. Pharmacy, yeah.
Well, with that, I'll say thank you to the group who listened tonight, and hope you leave tonight with some memories of East Litchfield and Topsmead that you can carry with you for many years. I'm done.
Thank you.